Welcome back to Meet the Ministers. My guest on the program this evening is Scott Emerson, the member for Indooroopilly. We've touched on your career in journalism already. At one stage, you were the National Chief of Staff of the Australian during the Sydney Olympics. That must have been a pretty busy and enjoyable time.
It was a very exciting time, Shaun. It very much the case. We were down there for a month, the 2 weeks in preparation, and then the 2 weeks of the games. It was full on, but a very exciting time for that city. I know the Gold Coast is hoping to get the Commonwealth Games at the moment, and obviously we're very excited and hopeful for them. But I don't think it'll compare quite with the Olympics down in Sydney. It was just transformed that city.
What does a day in the life of the National Chief of Staff of the Australian constitute of during something like the Olympics? What would you be doing day by day?
It's a very, very long day, as you can imagine. Get in very early, trying to work out what stories are going to be, anticipating what stories are going to come. Yep. And the nature of journalism, which is one of the appeals of being a journalist, is you don't really sure what you're going to do. You know, for most jobs, you can tell what you're going to be doing today and tomorrow, even 6 months' time. The great joy of journalism is that you don't know necessarily. You walk into that office that day, you don't know what's going to be confronted with. But you try to anticipate as much as you can. It's coordinating staff, working what stories are going to come, and then having the capacity to react to the news and the unexpected. And that's what it's all about. And then putting together a newspaper. Newspapers have been described as the daily miracle. Because if you have a look at all those people coming together and those stories coming together, when you get it at the bottom of your house, you know, on the doorstep in the morning, it's amazing to see what's appeared from the day before.
What do you remember about that time? What's the memory that really sticks with you about the Sydney Olympics?
It was the teamwork. The teamwork of so many people coming together.
Like how many people are working on the Olympics solely for the whole time?
There would have been probably, in terms of more than 100, in terms of reporters, sub-editors, photographers, people out at events, all coming together, and they're just the kind of the newspaper side of it, as opposed to the production side of it, which goes on top of that, and all pulling together, making decisions. And also, there is a competitive environment. You're trying to beat your rivals in terms of the news stories. So you're waiting right at the end of the day to find out what your rivals have got, and see if they've got stories you haven't got, or hopefully you've got that exclusive that no one else had, and that's part of the excitement as well. The media, particularly newspapers, are in the press at the moment for a number of reasons. What's your take on what's going on with the Murdoch news empire? I dare say you've worked here in Brisbane with the Courier Mail? With the Australian. I worked for News Limited for 10 years. Look, it's obviously it's very sad what we saw out of England and the news of the world. What I particularly was very sad for, not just those people, obviously the tragedy of people being hacked into in terms of phones and victims of crime and such things, but also a lot of those, don't forget, those people who work on those newspapers had jobs, and most of those people in the news of the world weren't there when any of the hacking was alleged to have occurred. They've lost their jobs. They've got families, they've got careers, and they've suffered as well. Hopefully we'll see it cleaned up. But I think it's got a long way to go. It is a fascinating news story in itself to see what's going to happen out of that. And I don't think anyone's really sure how far it's going to go or what the consequences are going to be. Is it possible to turn around in 6 months, a year's time, and just continue on as the way things were? Has this changed the face of newspaper journalism, do you think? I think in England, in terms of the influence of the Murdoch newspapers, I think that's not going to disappear now. What the impact has been. In 6 months' time, people aren't going to forget. It won't be in the news all the time, but that sense for the politicians, in terms of Rupert Murdoch or Rebecca Brooks coming to the Downing Street to meet with the Prime Minister and such things, politicians are going to be reacting differently to the media. I think that's what's going to be the significant change from that side of things. Yeah. At what point were you in your journalistic career when you suddenly started considering a career in politics? Was there a moment that you can look back on it when the clock ticked over and you suddenly went from being a journalist to regarding yourself as a politician? No, I was fortunate enough to have in between to run my own business. For 5 years I had my own PR firm. So the transition was probably a 3-step process. I was a journalist,
And then I got a Churchill Fellowship and went and studied overseas doing research at Harvard and near Boston, and then in Washington. We did that for a while. When I came back, I said to my wife, look, I think I'm going to try to start my own business and get into the business sector. I started an MBA, and at that stage I got approached by a couple of guys to work in a PR firm as an equity partner and a director. So I did that for 5 years. And then during that process, after I'd left journalism, but still had an interest in politics, I'd always been interested since I was a small boy, it came to me about possibly putting my hand up to be an MP. All that time while I was a journalist and running my PR firm, my wife and I had been very heavily involved in our community. We'd not just in P&Cs and P&Fs or sporting teams. We'd started our own local community association many years earlier and founded that because we felt that the community wanted to know what their politicians were doing and have an active say in what happened.
And is that the idea of a local community association? Is that the purpose of it?
Well, that was actually the issue for us was that we felt we weren't being told necessarily what was happening. We wanted a venue where we could get the local MP or the local councillor to come and talk to people and explain to them why the decision was being made and answer those questions. That we thought was very important. And that was probably the transition step. We had an experience with one particular project where we felt that we'd been lied to by the local... It wasn't the local councillor or the local MP, it was someone else making those decisions. And at that point we said, this is not good enough, but we felt we were kind of banging our heads against the wall, and that kind of drove us to say, look, I think we can actually contribute to this. And for many people thought it would be my wife rather than me that got into politics, because we were both so actively involved. And she was quite regularly in papers talking about issues in the local community, about how things could be better. In the end, it was me.
Was it an easy transition?
No, it wasn't, because there's a lot of criticism out there about people, politicians out there. I think people don't quite understand what the sacrifices and the challenges there are to run as a politician. You're putting yourself out there to be criticised. You're very exposing yourself to run for Parliament. Your faces are on billboards and call flutes out there. People are saying, well, why are you doing that? You know, who do you think you are? You must have a big ego. You must want to do this for such and such reasons. So it's a big challenge. And there's no second prize. You win or you lose. It's not like the Olympics. There's no silver podium. You win on the night or you don't. And so that's a big challenge. And for anyone out there too, I'm coming up for my second election. I won at the last election. It may even be they say the second election's even harder, because if you lose the first one, you probably still got your job to go back to. You lose the second one, you haven't got a job to go back to. That's been your job. And not many people face that situation that every 3 years someone else will decide if you've got a job. And so that's a challenge.
It's a truly unique situation. There's not too many others like it, is there?
No, but there are immense rewards. You always think you can do better in certain areas, and you wish you could do more. But I find it remarkably satisfying, the electorate work, talking to people, trying to solve some of the issues they have, trying to make government work better for them, look at issues in my local area and say, we can make that better. And that's very satisfying.
My guest on the program is Scott Emerson. Scott's the member for Indooroopilly. I'm Shaun Bindley, and this is Meet the Ministers.